Today's story is one of my favorite in the Gospel of Mark. And I'm going to perform it first, and then we'll talk through some of the dynamics that are present in it. What I'd like you to watch for as I tell it is the way the various characters are situated by the storyteller. Me as storyteller, but also the way the narrative is constructed as a way to have a storyteller sharing this story. So let's give it a try. And Jesus returned in the boat and was met by a large crowd, and he was by the sea. A leader of the synagogue, Jairus by name, seeing him and coming, fell down at his feet and pleaded with him urgently, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come, lay hands on her so that she might be restored and live." And Jesus went with him, and the whole crowd was following him, pressing him. Now there was a woman having a flow of blood for 12 years, having suffered many things under the hands of many physicians, indeed, having spent everything she had, but not having gotten any better, but having gotten worse. Hearing about Jesus, coming behind him in a crowd, she touched his cloak. She'd been saying to herself, if I just touch his cloak, I'll be restored. And the source of the bleeding dried up within her, and she knew in her body that she'd been healed. Jesus knew within himself that power had gone out of him, so he turned around the crowd. He said, "Who touched my cloak?" His disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing you. You ask who touched you." But Jesus kept looking to see who had done it. And the woman, knowing what had happened to her, trembling and afraid, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your courageous trust has saved you. Go off and be free from your affliction." Now while he says this, some people come from the house of the leader of the synagogue, and they say to him, "Your daughter, she's died." And overhearing this, Jesus said to him, "Don't be afraid. Trust courageously." And he wouldn't let anyone go with him except for Peter and James and John. And they come to the house of the leader of the synagogue, and they see a great commotion, lots of weeping and wailing. And entering into the house, Jesus says, "Why all this commotion, this weeping and wailing? The child's not dead. She's sleeping." And they started to taunt him. And driving them out, he took with him the father of the little girl and her mother and those who were with him. And going to the place where she lay, he grasped her hand and said to her, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, rise." And she rose. She started walking around. She was 12 years old. And they were stunned. Great astonishment. Oh, and Jesus ordered them to tell no one about this. And they should give the girl something to eat. There's so much going on in this story that's worthy of unpacking. You have the two primary characters besides Jesus driving the story. There's Jairus, a synagogue leader, a man most likely of respect and authority and power in the community. But in the midst of his crisis, he falls down before Jesus and pleads with him. There's also the unclean woman, the woman with a flow of blood. Often, characters are introduced with a simple phrase. Sometimes it's only, "and the Pharisee said." But this woman has an extensive introduction that is rivaled only by the introduction of John the Baptist at the beginning of the narrative. He had camel's hair, dressed in camel's hair, a leather band around his waist, ate locusts and wild honey. And the man possessed by a demon in the story right prior to this one describes his situation in the tombs and his strength and his self-affliction. These extended introductions of a narrator, of a narrated character, set up the character, and they give the storyteller time to become the character by the time they speak. This particular portrayal of the woman has an interesting grammatical structure. It is packed with participle after participle after participle, with ever hitting a main verb until late in the story to give it some traction. So the woman, having a flow of blood for 12 years, having visited many physicians, having spent everything she had, having not gotten better, but having gotten worse, hearing about Jesus, coming behind him in the crowd, and then finally, she touched his cloak. Right? This use of of participles instead of having all things be resolved by a verb gives us a sense of suspense and ongoing. The wheels are spinning until finally touched, and the wheels can grab and have traction. Another interesting verbal feature is the use of historic presence. Jairus' situation is made more serious as he comes and he sees Jesus, pleads with him. When the people come from the house of the leader of the synagogue, the verbs are designed so that we see that the story of the woman doesn't end and then the story of the trip to the synagogue house begins, but rather there's overlap between the two. While Jesus still says these things to her, some people come from the house of the leader of the synagogue and they say to Jairus, "Your little daughter, she's died." And Jesus, overhearing it, says to Jairus. Right? So all these present tense verbs make us realize that all the characters are still on stage. And suddenly, the woman who was driven forward by her quest, right, her courageous trust, becomes an example for the man of status, Jairus, to follow. Don't be afraid. Trust courageously. And Jesus, still present in conversation with the woman, gestures to her so that Jairus notices her, and also we who are in the audience notice this woman being lifted up in our presence. The woman has no name, and likewise the place that the first healing happens has no name. It's a nondescript place that's part of a journey narrative. That allows us to bring it into whatever place we have, just as her lack of name offers the opportunity for multiple people to say, oh, that story is about me and the kinds of things I've known in life. The narrator wants us to realize that this is not simply a story of one or two people's healing. I would like to say that there are three healings. Jairus' house receives healing, but he only does that if he's willing to go with Jesus through the margins. If he stops then when Jesus is unclean by the touch of the woman, or when he's delayed, or when those who come to meet Jairus scoff at him, oh, this so-called teacher, well, then Jairus will not have healing come to his house. But he, to his credit, sticks with Jesus, learns from the example of the woman, and goes with Jesus to the eventual healing of his daughter. I like the little humorous incident at the end. It seems like it's over. Oh, the parents are astounded by what has happened. End of story. Oh, wait. Can you believe this Jesus guy? He says to them not to tell anyone. Come on, Jesus. All those people were at the funeral. Don't you think the topic might come up when they see the young girl healed, walking around again alive. And then that last little line, just showing his concern for her basic needs. Give the girl something to eat. We have here the story of two people whose lives suddenly become entwined. They both fall down before Jesus in a similar posture. Jairus pleading for his daughter, the woman telling Jesus the whole truth. There's these interesting suggested connections that are not explained. The woman has been suffering with her condition for 12 years. The little girl is 12 years old. The woman's condition has involved the flow of blood. The young girl is 12 years old at the point where her flow will begin. They are caught up in the trauma of life. They also become new in the presence of Jesus, who raises Jairus' daughter and gives the woman whose name we still do not know the moniker of daughter. 3 healings take place: the bleeding woman, the daughter of Jairus, and the fabric of society. I hope you enjoy telling this story and drawing others into its impact. Thank you.